So look, I'm Jonathan Young from Waimate Centennial School, and I'm going to talk to you today about wellbeing both at Centennial School and at the Kahuiako in Waimate. So 7 schools down there in the Kahuiako, and we've been organised into a Kahuiako probably for as long as anyone in the country. And during that time, all the principals would have noticed their staff under duress or, out of sorts at best, at some stage. And I think wellbeing is an issue that is not confined to people who you might think are mentally ill. I think it's something that it affects every person at some stage. So I think that's a point to make. The most important tool in the toolbox was this document here, a toolkit to 5 ways to wellbeing, and I'll talk about that as we go through, but I thought it's important to have that up front. So this toolkit has become a really good guide for us at Centennial School in terms of wellbeing, and I'm going to just speak to bits of it as we go this morning. So what is wellbeing? So we know that when workplaces like our Kahuiako and school embrace wellbeing, staff feel better about being at work, they feel better about the job they do, and they're more productive, if that's important, and I think it is. But I think that mostly it's about them feeling more able to cope with their day-to-day lives. I think that's really important. And as I said before, at one point in the year, for every staff at my place anyway, there'll be some issue that they encounter that creates stress or less than adequate wellbeing for them. And so, as a principal, you're kind of keeping an eye over all of that. And so it's not confined to anyone or one type of person. In fact, when I have staff mention that they're stressed, that's a serious sign for me that things are not good, because if people are prepared to say it, especially before we started doing the wellbeing thing, then it was serious. Okay, so what did we do about wellbeing? So Janet and Anna from WAVE came along and introduced the idea of wellbeing to us 2 years ago and a bit. We decided that the first step was to go to principals and spend some time with principals getting the concepts in place. The promotion was obviously good because we took it on. The principals found the presentation very good, unanimously decided that it was the right way to go for the Kahuiako and for themselves individually. In terms of the whole Kahuiako, when presentation was made later, that wasn't quite as successful, and I think it was largely due to the fact that it was a large group, huge group of people, 50 odd people in a room. The small group of principals and in fact individual staff meetings are a really good way to promote wellbeing. I think large groups, it's less effective. So that's something to think about. So one of the first steps was to consider the model we were going to use, and there are several different ways of approaching wellbeing. And it seemed to us a logical way to go was the model of 5 ways to wellbeing. So one of the first things we did was break down the model and make sure that everyone on our staffs had an idea of what were the component parts of it. So the 5 ways are to connect, to give, to take notice, to keep learning, and to be active. And we'll talk more about those as we go on. One of the most important things I think with every initiative in a school is leadership. And leadership, I'm not talking about principal leadership, I'm talking about people leading themselves. But in terms of an initiative, if you want an initiative to succeed in school, you need someone to be the champion. And if you are the principal who's the champion, then research says that it's more likely to succeed. So the leader has to model the behaviours, and that makes those behaviours real for the people who work in the workplace. You have to champion the program. You have to provide purpose for people to adopt the program, and when they see you leading by example, they'll think it's a suitable thing to be involved with. So we we took the approach that we would focus on teachers first, and for a whole year the focus of wellbeing in Waimate was just on teachers. We knew that eventually we would get to focusing wellbeing on students and then to the wider community. And so that's a long journey that we are not yet well through. So, once you've got your leadership organised, and we eventually ended up with 2 people on my staff, on the Centennial staff, who showed real initiative and interest and passion. And so they became the people who led the staff meetings and led the karakias and the wellbeing activities at the start of each staff meeting. So we were lucky, and I guess every staff is the same. If somebody is interested in wellbeing, and they'll stand up and take a lead. So the next step is, once your leadership is in place, is to begin to create an environment or build a culture that is wellbeing, suited or wellbeing appropriate. We were quite lucky that our culture was kind of in the right place anyway. We're a PB4L school, and we are a restorative school, and those things all sort of fit well with the concept of connecting with others, giving back, and so we had the beginnings of a suitable environment in place. So the culture needs to acknowledge staff, provide opportunities for people to learn, respect each other. And there are, lots of ways of breaking down the 5 ways of wellbeing that give you examples of how to do that. But those are the basic values, and respect is a big thing at our place, and it's become a bigger thing. So that's important. So the next step is, once you've got your environment on the way, you won't create that overnight. That's something that, as you work along the wellbeing journey, your culture and your environment, create themselves. So the next step is to make it happen. And I think the message is really important. Some of the staff decided that they were going to be active by walking at lunchtime, and eventually most of the staff would walk around the block at lunchtimes when they weren't on duty, and that was great. Then we decided that the best approach was to break the whole staff into teams of 2, and there were the right amount of people for each of the 5 ways to wellbeing to have at least 2 people in them. And staff teams chose one of the 5 ways of wellbeing, and then worked on ways that they could present that their way over a period of 2 weeks to the rest of the staff. And so the GIVE team provided morning teas and a lunch and things like that. And so that was another good way for us to try and make it happen in our place. We ended up with a shout-out wall where we could be noticing what people were doing around the school. On a sticky note, you recorded something, and it was a way of saying thank you. At the end of the week, we put the names in the hat and drew out a winner, and they got a prize. You've been mugged. There's a mug going around with some kind of reward in it that arrives mysteriously on someone else's desk with a nice message in it, and then that person is responsible for passing the mug on to somebody else. Lots of little ways like that of making it appealing and introducing wellbeing in a fun way. So goal setting was another way that we thought would make it happen, and every staff member, as part of the appraisal, accepted a wellbeing challenge that lasted a whole year. At several times during the year, I chatted with them and when they were having appraisal conversations about how the wellbeing goal was going. And at the end of the year, I was able to look at their whole project throughout the year, their whole inquiry, and see how that had gone for them, and talk it through with them. One of the first things we did was we had a 3-week period where we noted down everything that was positive about our days. And I did do this fairly strictly right through for 3 weeks, and I kept an iPad note of 3 good things every day that I thought had happened. And then for 3 weeks, I didn't keep a note of what had happened. And at the end of the 6 weeks period, I looked back at my wellbeing across those 6 weeks, and it was remarkable how different my wellbeing was over a 6-week period when I was recording the things that were really good that were happening each day. And simple things like I talked to my daughter today, or I was able to talk to kids about something that happened and we had a great time. Just simple things like that, rather than focusing on the negative things which we tend to do. And I wasn't on my own. That was a big project. That was enough of a get up and go for us to start working on wellbeing seriously. A really good project to do. So communication, this is, I think, really important aspect to the 5 ways to wellbeing, is to be able to communicate how you're going and what's working well for you and what's not. So we put up posters in our staff room, the 5 ways to wellbeing posters. We had posters from staff meetings that we created brainstorms on. And the ones that are still in the staff room now, a couple of years later, are the flourishing, the ways that our staff can flourish, and the ways that does it feel good and flourish? Yeah. Feel good and flourish. So we've got 2 posters, and they've been there through the whole time, and people still, they haven't taken them down, so they must be important. Newsletters, we put things in the newsletters occasionally. And just have little promotions from time to time to keep wellbeing in front of people, like a baby photo competition and things like that. And I think really along with communication, it's important to celebrate success. Every staff meeting we have now, we start with a wellbeing activity, and it might only be 5 minutes, but somebody will lead it. We're using VIA cards lately, but any little activity like that. We used a spider graph. We created a spider graph the other day, and then we carry on with the normal staff meeting. So that some of these activities staff have said have been provocative and challenging, and some people have said that they haven't necessarily enjoyed some of them. And so some of it's not necessarily all, box of roses. And I think you probably have to be really careful about how what you present for the people in your group what they require at this time. So you have to be a little bit careful. But that'll come. You'll understand that. Another way we've celebrated successes is that the board. I've talked to the board regularly about, if we have a teacher-only day or something like that, the board will provide a lunch for the staff, just as a way of saying thank you, and or maybe for no reason at all, just provide a lunch, and staff appreciate that. One of the other ways we celebrated the success of wellbeing was to walk the length of New Zealand. This was during lockdown. We got our whānau to engage and get out of their houses and go for a walk, and every time they walked, they recorded the kilometres they walked and sent that off, and I gathered all those up and made a tally of that and marked our progress on the map. And each day that I talked to them over the Skype, I said to them that we're in Dunedin today, or we're in Christchurch or whatever, and in a week we got to Northland, so that was good. Just a couple of other things to finish off. I think there's some basics that you can do with a staff to get them into the right mood for wellbeing, and to provide them with strategies to use at other times when they're not well. And one of those was breathing exercises. and we did a thing called 4 square breathing, which we only used a couple of times, but it stuck with me. And at 4 a.m. this morning, I tried to use it. It didn't work, but generally it does. And so you breathe in for 4 and you hold for 4, and you breathe out for 4, a count of 4, and you hold for 4. And sometimes, after you've been doing that for a few minutes, if it's not working, then you hold for 10, and then you hold for 3, and just mix it up. And eventually that brings my heart rate down, and I can then relax and sometimes go back to sleep. So that was one little exercise we did with staff, and that worked really well. Another one was a visualization activity that was a really good promotion for staff. So you put yourself in your dream place, in the place that you really enjoy being, and you imagine 5 things that you can see while you're there, 5 things you can hear, 5 things you can smell, touch, and taste. And by the time you've been through that exercise, and you've done your 4 square breathing, you're asleep. So that's good. But anyway, in a normal staff room situation, it's a good de-stressor and good skills for people to have for those times in their lives where they need it. One of the other very successful things that we've done as a kahuiako is to employ somebody to become a wellbeing expert. So in the kahuiako regime, if you're a primary principal, you can put people into positions of responsibility to take on special projects, and we have one person who looks after wellbeing. One of the first things this person did was produce a pot with potting mix in it and a bulb, and gave every school one to put on the staff room table. And we had no idea what was in the pot, what sort of bulb it was, or how many bulbs there were. But we were instructed to take photos regularly and talk to the pot and put it in the sun and water it and do all sorts of cute and cuddly things to the pot plant. It's been quite a good activity to do. The bulbs are growing into beautiful flowers now, but along the way we've done all sorts of silly things with them. We've put other flowers in and taken photos of it, and we've put them in funny places and taken photos. But just it's about team building and creating that culture, and giving people something to focus on, which isn't necessarily always about the stress and strains of work. We probably haven't quite got as far as we I said we haven't finished our journey yet. COVID mucked us up a bit, but it mucked us up, but it also gave us motivation to keep going with students, because during the lockdown I talked to every parent in the school 2 or 3 times, and I got other teachers to do the same thing, to ask about how they were and what they needed for themselves and for their children. So it's kind of motivated us to do things differently, and with wellbeing, I think that's really important. Just making those connections was important for us. But you're right, taking things that we did with the principals to start with, and then the teachers, and then putting it into the classroom. And the final part of the journey will be relaying all of that to the community, or to move it out into the community.